The blue thing landed beside my plate without a sound. It was small, folded neatly, the color sharp against white porcelain. Not trash. Not an accident. A woman I didn't know paused just long enough to meet my eyes. Her smile wasn't friendly, it was precise. "You'll need this tonight," she said softly, then walked away before I could ask a single question. Around us, the restaurant kept breathing. Silverware clinked. A waiter laughed. Wine glasses chimed. But the air at my table went cold. I didn't touch the thing. I finished my meal with steady hands, paid, and left. Outside, under the amber streetlights, I unfolded it. A blue nitrile glove. Inside it, tucked like a secret, was a key card and a note with one sentence written in a tight, deliberate hand. "Don't go home. Check your car." I didn't panic. Panic makes noise, and noise attracts predators. I walked, counted my steps, listened to my own breath. When I reached my car, I crouched and ran my fingers beneath the frame. There it was, smooth plastic, no larger than a matchbox, magnetized into place. A tracker. I laughed once, quietly. Someone had spent money on me. That meant I was valuable to them, or dangerous. I drove not home, but to a friend's garage on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like oil and honesty. We pulled the tracker, wrapped it in foil, and drove it far, past the river, past the old quarry, before tossing it into a trash bin behind a truck stop that never slept. Then I went somewhere else entirely and slept like a stone. By morning, I knew who had put it there. For months, my life had been tugged by invisible hands, missed bids, contracts evaporating, rumors surfacing just before negotiations. Someone was siphoning my work, my ideas, my leverage. They weren't clumsy. They were patient. And they were close. I didn't confront them. I studied them. I watched how they smiled too quickly, how they leaned on shared history, how they borrowed without asking and returned nothing but promises. I let them believe the tracker still whispered my location. I let them believe I was predictable. I let them believe I was alone. I built a second life in the margins. New numbers, new routines, quiet meetings with quieter people. I stopped correcting lies told about me and started cataloging who benefited from them. I documented everything, timestamps, emails, voice notes, each piece placed carefully, like tiles in a mosaic that only made sense when you stepped back. The woman with the blue glove found me again a week later, this time in daylight. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. She slid a flash drive across a cafe table and said, "They think you're soft." I smiled. They always do. On the drive were receipts, bank transfers, shell companies, copied files sold twice, names signed to documents they'd never read. The people who had been bleeding me dry were sloppy in one way. They underestimated the quiet. I waited. 3 months later, the night came. I hosted a dinner. Nothing flashy. Familiar faces, familiar jokes. I poured the wine myself. When the room was warm and careless, I set my phone on the table and pressed play. Voices filled the air, confident, mocking, exact. Dates, numbers, plans. Laughter that curdled as recognition dawned. Faces paled. Someone stood up, then sat back down when the door behind them didn't open. I hadn't locked it. Fear does that all by itself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I slid folders across the table, copies of everything, and explained, calmly, what would happen next. Who would receive what? Which accounts would be frozen by morning? How quickly the rumors would reverse themselves once the truth learned to walk. They begged. They begged with the same mouths that had smiled at my misfortune. They begged with stories about families and futures and misunderstandings. I listened, because listening costs nothing and teaches you everything. "No," I said at last. "You planned this carefully." So did I. I left them there, not ruined but exposed, forced to choose between consequences and confession. Either way, they couldn't touch me again. The next day, my phone rang once. Unknown number. "It's done," the woman said. "You're clear." I never saw her again. I kept the blue glove. Sometimes revenge is loud, sometimes it's a blade. But the most powerful kind is quiet and patient and leaves no fingerprints. It doesn't announce itself. It simply waits until the night is right, then changes who gets to beg. The moment the blue object touched the table, everything in my life shifted, even though no one else noticed. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No glass shattered. It was just a quiet placement beside my plate, deliberate and calm, as if the woman had rehearsed it. I remember the weight of the room, the smell of roasted garlic, the low murmur of conversations, the scrape of a chair behind me, and how her presence cut through all of it. She didn't ask permission. She didn't apologize. She looked at me the way surgeons look at skin before the first incision, certain and unafraid. "You'll need this tonight," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Then she was gone. For several seconds, I didn't move. I didn't look down right away. Years of dealing with people who smile while planning your ruin teaches you one thing above all else: the first reaction is the one that betrays you. So I kept chewing, kept my posture relaxed, kept my eyes on the far wall like nothing had happened. Only when the waiter returned did I casually slide the blue thing closer to my fork, letting my sleeve hide it. A glove, nitrile, unused, clean. Inside it, something hard pressed against my fingers. That was when I knew this wasn't a prank. I paid my bill with the same card I always used, tipped well, and walked out at the same unhurried pace I always kept. Outside, the night air felt too open, too exposed. I crossed the street, turned the corner, and only then unfolded the glove beneath a flickering street lamp. A key card slid into my palm. Cheap hotel brand, room number handwritten on the back, along with a note that stopped my breath for half a second. "Don't go home. Check your car." Fear tried to crawl up my spine, but I crushed it. Fear makes people predictable, and whoever sent this message didn't want me predictable. They wanted me alive. I circled the block once before approaching my car. From a distance, it looked untouched. No broken glass. No forced locks. I unlocked it, sat inside for exactly 3 seconds, then got out and knelt as if tying my shoe. My fingers moved along the underside of the chassis, slow and methodical. When I felt the smooth, foreign plastic, I didn't flinch. A tracker. So small. So confident. I understood then that this hadn't started tonight. Tonight was just the moment someone decided I deserved a warning. Someone had been mapping my movements, my habits, my life. Someone who knew where I ate. Someone who knew I'd be alone. I removed the tracker carefully, holding it through the glove like it might bite. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Anger is a better stabilizer than fear. And I was angry, not loud angry, not reckless angry, but the cold, patient kind that sharpens your thoughts and stretches time. I didn't go home. I didn't go to the hotel either. Instead, I drove aimlessly for 40 minutes, making random turns, watching my mirrors, testing the silence. Only when I was certain no one followed did I stop at a 24-hour garage owned by an old friend who asked questions only after the work was done. We wrapped the tracker in foil, buried it inside a toolbox, and left it running in a truck headed 2 towns over. Whoever was watching would think I disappeared into cheap motels and bad decisions. Let them. That night, lying on a stranger's couch, I replayed the last few months in my mind. Deals that fell apart for no reason. Information that leaked before it should have existed. People who suddenly knew things I had never said out loud. I had blamed bad luck, competition, timing. I stopped doing that at 3 in the morning. By dawn, I knew the truth was uglier. The threat wasn't outside my circle, it was inside it. The glove wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation. An opening. A chance to stop being the hunted and start becoming something else entirely. I realized that whoever had planted that tracker believed I was oblivious, reactive, weak. They believed I would confront, accuse, explode. They believed wrong. I went back to my routine the next day. Same coffee, same routes, same smiles. I let the absence of the tracker lull them into confidence. I let them think their net was still tight around me. Inside, I was already dismantling it thread by thread. The woman had given me more than a glove. She had given me time. And time, when used properly, is the sharpest weapon there is. After the night with the blue glove, I became 2 people living in the same body. On the surface, nothing changed. I woke at the same hour, answered messages with the same tone, showed up to meetings carrying the same calm confidence people expected from me. But underneath that familiar skin, something new had formed, quiet, watchful, and no longer willing to give anyone the benefit of doubt. I had learned that danger doesn't always announce itself with raised voices or broken doors. Sometimes it smiles at you across a table and waits for you to look away. I didn't rush to accuse anyone. Accusations are loud, and loud things collapse before they reach the truth. Instead, I slowed down. I started paying attention to patterns I had once dismissed as coincidence. Who asked too many questions about projects that weren't theirs? Who seemed oddly relaxed when things went wrong for me? Who always knew just a little more than they should? These were not strangers. These were people I had trusted, people I had defended in rooms they were never allowed into. The realization didn't hurt the way betrayal is supposed to. It clarified. Once you accept that loyalty is often just convenience in disguise, you stop being surprised. I began testing them, gently at first. I shared slightly altered details, small pieces of information that were harmless on their own but unique enough to trace. When those details surfaced elsewhere, repeated almost word for word, I didn't react, I wrote it down. Date, time, name, context. At the same time, I studied my own weaknesses. I mapped my habits the way a hunter maps trails. I knew exactly where I was careless, where I was predictable, where I had been generous to a fault. I changed none of it publicly. Privately, I built mirrors, new passwords, segmented access, backup accounts, parallel plans that only I knew existed. Every important document had a twin. Every conversation that mattered left a shadow behind it. The people watching me grew bolder. I could feel it in the way they spoke, in the subtle condescension that crept into their voices. They believed they were ahead of me, and confidence makes thieves sloppy. They reused tactics. They recycled lies. They trusted the same channels that had worked before. I let them. Each mistake was a gift. Nights became my classroom. I listened to recordings with headphones pressed tight, replaying moments that once seemed innocent. A pause before an answer. A laugh that arrived half a second too late. The sound of a keyboard in the background of a call where no one else was supposed to be present. Tiny things. But tiny things add up when you stop ignoring them. I also learned how alone power makes people. Those who were undermining me had convinced themselves they were untouchable, smarter than everyone else in the room. They underestimated silence. They underestimated patience. Most of all, they underestimated how far I was willing to go without being seen. I stopped defending myself against rumors. Letting lies breathe is often the fastest way to watch who feeds them. Names emerged naturally like stains rising through fabric. I never confronted them. I smiled. I nodded. I thanked them for their concern. Every false word they spread became another thread in the net I was weaving. There were moments when anger threatened to push me toward the edge, when I wanted to flip the table and expose everything at once. But I remembered the glove. I remembered the tracker. I remembered how close I had come to being blindsided completely. Revenge rushed as revenge wasted. I wanted something cleaner, something final. Weeks turned into months. My private archive grew heavy with proof. Messages saved in 3 places, files backed up off-grid, timelines so precise they could not be argued with. I wasn't collecting gossip. I was building a structure so solid that denial would sound ridiculous inside it. By the end of the 3rd month, I could see the entire operation clearly. Who started it? Who benefited most? Who merely followed because following was easier than thinking? It wasn't personal to them. That almost made it worse. I had been a resource, not a human being. And that was when I understood the second truth the woman had handed me that night. Survival isn't about escaping the trap. It's about learning who built it and making sure they can never build another one again. So I stayed quiet. I stayed visible. And I waited, stronger, smarter, and no longer mistaken for someone who wouldn't notice when the knives came out. By the time I was certain of what they were doing, I was also certain of what I would not do. I would not confront them in private, where lies are agile and memories conveniently fragile. I would not warn them, because warning gives people time to destroy evidence and rehearse excuses. Most of all, I would not let them see me change. The version of me they thought they knew, predictable, reasonable, forgiving, was the disguise that kept them careless. So I kept wearing it. Every morning I stepped into that role like an actor returning to a long-running play. Same rotes, same habits, same expressions. I complained about small inconveniences, laughed at old jokes, and allowed them to believe I was still struggling in ways that benefited them. When a deal slipped away, I sighed and shrugged. When a rumor reached my ears, I smiled like someone too tired to care. They mistook restraint for weakness, and that mistake became the cornerstone of everything that followed. Behind that mask, preparation was relentless. I didn't just gather proof, I curated it. Raw information is easy to dismiss, context is not. I built timelines that showed intent, not just coincidence. I layered conversations so patterns emerged even to the most skeptical eye. I made sure every piece of evidence could stand alone, because in rooms where power gathers, people love to separate things and pretend the whole never existed. I also learned to disappear in plain sight. I created decoy plans and let them leak, watching carefully who reacted first and how. Some people couldn't hide their excitement, others overplayed concern. Each reaction was a confession without words. I wrote everything down, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for how quickly humans rewrite their own past when it suits them. What surprised me most was how easy it was to let them think they were winning. People intoxicated by advantage rarely question the source of their luck. They stopped being cautious. They spoke freely around me, assuming my presence meant nothing. They forgot that silence can hear everything. There were nights when the weight of it all pressed hard against my ribs. Carrying truth alone is exhausting, but I reminded myself that this wasn't just about me anymore. Allowing them to continue meant enabling them to do the same thing to someone else. Someone less prepared, someone without a warning glove placed beside their plate. That thought steadied me when doubt crept in. I began setting the stage without announcing it. I suggested meetings to clear the air, dinners to reconnect, collaborations to move forward together. I let them believe reconciliation was coming, that my patience was finally paying off. Hope is a powerful blinder. They dressed up. They relaxed. They came willingly. In those final weeks, I triple-checked everything. Files were duplicated. Witnesses were quietly prepared. Legal advice was taken in rooms where no one knew my name. I imagined every possible escape route they might try and sealed it in advance. By the time the night arrived, there was nothing left to improvise. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't waiting because I was afraid. I was waiting because timing is the difference between exposure and erasure. I wanted the truth to land when it would echo the loudest, when it would be impossible to ignore, when walking away would cost more than staying and listening. So I sat across from them, smiling, listening, letting the illusion hold for just a little longer. Inside I felt calm, not the calm of surrender, but the calm of someone who knows the ending and is simply allowing the final scene to play out. They thought they had broken me slowly, invisibly, over time. What they never saw was that every quiet moment, every polite nod, every delayed reaction was sharpening the blade. And when it finally fell, it wouldn't need force. It would need only the truth, released all at once, in a room where no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that what they had done wasn't a single betrayal but a system. A careful, repeating pattern designed to drain value while leaving just enough behind to keep the victim functional and confused. At first glance, it looked like bad luck and mistiming. Only when I laid everything side by side did the shape of it reveal itself, ugly and precise. This wasn't chaos. This was engineering. I rebuilt the past piece by piece. Every failed contract, every leaked proposal, every sudden competitor advantage was pulled out of memory and pinned to a timeline. Dates aligned too neatly. Losses clustered around the same names, the same meetings, the same casual conversations where I had been generous with information because I believed in mutual respect. I felt a brief sting at my own naivety, but I didn't linger there. Regret wastes energy better spent on correction. Money told the clearest story. It always does. I followed trails through shell accounts that looked harmless on their own. Small transfers, consulting fees, reimbursements, but when viewed together formed a steady river flowing away from everything I had built. They weren't stealing in ways that triggered alarms. They were siphoning, patient and confident that no one would ever bother to look closely enough. I noticed how often my own work appeared elsewhere, polished just enough to seem original. Ideas I had spoken aloud in trusted rooms showed up in rival pitches. Language I recognized as mine appeared in documents I had never signed. At first, I wondered if I was imagining it. Then I stopped doubting and started verifying. File metadata, edit histories, access logs. The truth doesn't hide well when you know where to shine the light. What chilled me most was how normal they acted while doing it. There was no malice in their faces, no guilt in their voices. They laughed with me, congratulated me, commiserated with me over losses they had orchestrated. It wasn't hatred that drove them. It was entitlement. They believed they deserved what they took because they were smart enough to take it. I cataloged everything with obsessive care. Screenshots, recordings, bank statements, internal messages saved in multiple formats and locations. I learned quickly that evidence isn't about quantity but clarity. Each piece had to answer a question: who, when, how, and why. I removed emotion from the archive. Anger had no place there. Facts did. As the picture sharpened, the hierarchy revealed itself. There was an architect, the one who started it, who decided I was expendable. There were lieutenants, people who knew enough to benefit but not enough to feel responsible. And there were opportunists who followed, because it was easy and profitable. Understanding their roles mattered. It meant I could predict their behavior when pressure finally arrived. I also prepared for the inevitable counterattack. People who steal for a living are experts at denial. I anticipated claims of misunderstanding, coincidence, shared inspiration. That's why every accusation I planned to make was backed by multiple independent sources. Remove one piece, and the structure still stood. Pull another, and it remained upright. There was no single thread to cut. At times, the weight of the knowledge felt almost too heavy to carry alone. Knowing the truth while pretending ignorance requires discipline. But there was also a strange clarity in it. I was no longer confused. I was no longer guessing. The fog that had surrounded my failures lifted, replaced by something colder, but far more useful certainty. By the end of it, I wasn't just ready to expose them. I understood them. I knew their habits, their fears, their favorite excuses. I knew who would talk first, who would pretend outrage, who would try to turn on the others to save themselves. Preparation turned the unknown into something manageable. What they had built in secret, I had mapped in silence. They believed complexity would protect them. They were wrong. Complexity only protects those who assume no one will ever slow down enough to understand it. I had slowed down, and once you truly understand a machine, taking it apart is no longer a matter of strength, only patience. The night I chose wasn't dramatic by accident. It was calculated. I wanted familiarity to soften them, routine to disarm them, comfort to make them careless. People guard themselves when they feel attacked, but they loosen when they believe they're being forgiven. So I invited them the way you invite old friends, warm messages, gentle jokes, references to shared history. I framed it as closure, a chance to reset after a difficult season. They accepted quickly. Relief makes people reckless. I arrived early. Not to pace, not to rehearse, but to settle the space, chairs placed just so. Lighting warm enough to feel safe, bright enough to reveal expressions when the truth landed. I tested the audio once, twice, 3 times, then put my phone away like it didn't matter. When the first of them walked in, smiling wide, clapping my shoulder as if nothing had ever been wrong, I returned the gesture without hesitation. There is power in giving nothing away. Wine flowed. Stories resurfaced. Laughter bounced off the walls. I watched them relax into the illusion they'd built, that I was still unaware, still behind, still scrambling to recover from losses they had engineered. They spoke freely, sometimes too freely, and I noted it all without writing a single thing down. By then, I didn't need notes. I knew this script by heart. When everyone was seated, when the room had reached that perfect midpoint between distraction and comfort, I stood, not abruptly, just enough to draw attention. I thanked them for coming. I spoke about trust, about history, about how easy it is for misunderstandings to grow in silence. Heads nodded. Someone even smiled sympathetically. That was when I pressed play. At first, they didn't recognize their own voices. Context does that. It disguises guilt until it's too late. Then phrases landed. Dates. Numbers. A laugh that shouldn't exist outside a private room. The air changed. You can feel it when truth enters a space. It doesn't shout. It sinks. One person reached for their glass and missed. Another tried to interrupt, then stopped when the next recording answered the objection before it was spoken. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let the evidence speak in the order I had chosen, each piece reinforcing the last. When denial surfaced, I slid folders across the table, copies neatly labeled impossible to dismiss, screenshots, transactions, access logs. I explained calmly what each meant, not as an accusation but as a conclusion already reached. They unraveled differently, just as I had predicted. One went pale and silent, staring at the table like it might swallow them. Another grew angry, voice rising, trying to dominate the room the way they always had. The architect tried charm, then logic, then finally fear. They spoke about consequences, about connections, about how exposing this would hurt everyone. I listened. When they finished, I told them they were right. It would hurt. That was the point. I laid out what would happen next, not as a threat, but as a schedule. Who would receive what information, and when? Which accounts would be audited by morning? Which partners had already been quietly notified? I explained how little room there was left for negotiation, and how any attempt to interfere would only add another layer to the story. Silence followed, thick and heavy. That was when the begging began. Not all at once. It never is. It starts with apologies framed as misunderstandings, then shifts to desperation when those fail. Promises were made: money, loyalty, anything. They spoke about families, about years of shared effort, about how this didn't have to end badly. I waited until the room exhausted itself. No, I said gently. This already ended. You just didn't know it yet. I stood, collected my things, and walked out without another word. I didn't look back. Closure doesn't require witnesses. The aftermath unfolded exactly as planned. Calls came in waves, some angry, some pleading, some pretending nothing had happened. I answered none of them. By the time morning arrived, the machinery I had set in motion was already too loud to ignore. Investigations began. Partnerships dissolved. Stories changed hands, this time with the truth attached. What surprised me wasn't their downfall. It was how quickly they turned on each other once the pressure arrived. Loyalty evaporated. Blame traveled fast. The system they had built collapsed inward, consuming itself. I watched from a distance, calm and clear. Revenge, when done properly, doesn't leave you hollow. It restores balance. It reminds the world, and yourself, that silence is not weakness, patience is not ignorance, and kindness is not consent. They had mistaken my stillness for surrender. By the time they realized the difference, all they could do was beg from the ruins of something they had broken themselves. 3 months after that night, the messages began. At first they came cautiously, as if testing whether I was still reachable, still reasonable, still the person they could manipulate with familiarity. A simple, "Can we talk?" followed by silence when I didn't respond. Then longer ones, heavy with nostalgia and selective memory, reminding me of shared beginnings and hard times overcome together. They spoke as if the past could be rearranged by tone alone. I read every word without answering. Distance has a way of revealing intent. The ones who had once spoken with confidence now typed carefully, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Others pretended nothing was wrong, sending casual updates and jokes as if we were still standing on equal ground. That told me everything I needed to know. People who believe they are innocent don't perform innocence so loudly. When they finally asked to meet, it wasn't out of courage. It was desperation. The systems they relied on were failing. Doors that had always opened for them were suddenly locked. Accounts were frozen pending review. Calls went unanswered. They had spent so long operating in shadows that they didn't know how to survive in the light. And they believed, truly believed, that I was their last remaining lever. The meeting was unplanned on their end, but anticipated on mine. I chose a neutral place, public enough to prevent theatrics, private enough to hear the cracks in their voices. When they arrived, they looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence they once wore like armor. One of them reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. I simply didn't return the gesture. They talked first. They always do when they're afraid. Apologies spilled out, tangled and poorly constructed. They blamed stress, misunderstanding, bad advice, even concern for me. Each excuse contradicted the last. When words failed, promises followed. Money, silence, cooperation. They offered me everything they thought I wanted, never realizing how little of it mattered anymore. I waited until they were done. Then I told them the truth, not the emotional truth, but the practical one. I explained that nothing they offered could change what had already been set in motion. That my silence wasn't negotiation, it was completion. I showed them, briefly, how thoroughly the path behind them had collapsed, not to gloat, to clarify. That was when the begging truly began. Voices broke, eyes filled. One of them actually dropped to their knees, right there between tables, whispering my name like a prayer. People nearby pretended not to notice, but desperation is loud even when it tries to be quiet. They asked for mercy, for time, for a chance to make things right. They promised loyalty with the same mouths that had once plotted my erasure. I felt nothing like triumph. I felt distance. No, I said, not unkindly. You had time. You had chances. You chose differently. I stood and left them there, still speaking, still reaching, still hoping the past version of me would return and save them. But that person was gone, not destroyed, refined. In the weeks that followed, their world continued to unravel. Investigations concluded. Consequences arrived with official language and stamped paper. Some faded quietly, taking deals that erased them from relevance. Others fought loudly and lost publicly. Every outcome had been anticipated, every reaction accounted for. And then something unexpected happened. The noise stopped. One by one, the messages ceased. The names that once filled my screen vanished from my days. In their absence, there was space to rebuild without interference, to move without watching my back, to breathe without calculation. I realized then that the true victory wasn't watching them fall. It was waking up without them in my thoughts at all. I kept the blue glove in a drawer, not as a trophy but as a reminder. Power doesn't announce itself. Protection sometimes arrives quietly. And the most complete revenge isn't destruction, it's survival so thorough that the people who tried to end you are reduced to a lesson you no longer need to revisit. They begged for me back because losing me cost them everything. I never looked back.